So, am I the only one who kind of finds it interesting that we had two movies this past weekend that feature characters named Lily and Atlas? I feel like most people are not going to catch on to that, but I did. But here we are. So it ends with us was directed by Justin Baldoni and it stars Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, Jenny Slate, Brandon Sklenner, and it's a movie about this woman named Lily. She opens up a flower shop and she begins this relationship with this man named Ryle. However, there are difficulties in the relationship, particularly when a former lover of Lily's is back in her life. And this was a movie that I was not looking forward to for a few reasons. Mainly the trailers themselves didn't look that interesting. I also never read the book that this movie was based off of. Plus, the whole subject matter of this movie, it just didn't sound like a good time at all. It just didn't make, it just kind of made me scream like, I really don't want to sit through this. But I gave it a chance because Blake Lively, I think she's an alright actress. Justin Baldoni, I remember liking him in Jane the Virgin, but haven't really liked most of his directorial work so far. But I decided to give it a chance, and it's not great if I'm being honest. It's not a great movie to me. And it's not because, oh, it's a chick flick, it's a romance movie and such. No, I just have a lot of issues with some of the stories and such. So let's dive into some of the things about this movie. Every actor in this movie, I feel like, does get a moment to shine. Blake Lively carries this movie for the most part. Justin Baldoni also does a really good job. You do kind of believe a lot of his character and like kind of like his good moments, his bad moments. You kind of understand at times why, like how this relationship got started. It's like, okay, that's actually understandable. And you do actually feel a lot for his character, I feel like. Even Jenny Slate, I felt like she had a good moment towards the end of the movie, which I won't spoil it, but it kind of makes up for some of the awkward humor that she has in the movie, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Brandon Sklenar, I thought he did an alright job. The younger actors in this movie who played the young Lily and Atlas are a little bit more convincing than the adult actors at times. I thought that was kind of interesting. I found that more interesting than I don't want to say present day, but like the adult versions of the characters. And I do think that like once you start getting into like the main plot of the movie, it does become a little bit more interesting because admittedly the first hour of this movie, there's a lot of issues with the first hour of the movie and kind of made me almost start laughing at times, but there were other people in the theater and I didn't want to upset them. But again, I'll talk about that. Like when it starts getting into a lot of the stuff that the movie's based off of, it actually kind of is interesting because it goes into directions that I feel like it's surprising because like at times it's like, okay, I can see what you're trying to do. You're kind of trying to still make these characters feel more like actual characters, more than just three-dimensional characters for the most part. And I do think the ideas are there, they're interesting enough, but I feel like the main issue with this movie is that at times it goes too far and not far enough at the same time. Now, it goes too far, like some of the things that are kind of shown in this movie, but at the same time, it doesn't really go deep into some of the themes. Like, it's kind of implied that this is all, cyclical and that it's happened in the past to various people and such. But I also felt like it didn't really go too far with that because this may be a spoiler, but if you read the book, I kind of looked it up before I saw this movie. It's mentioned that another character who's barely in this movie, I might add, also suffered from some of the same things in this movie. But that character doesn't really have much of an impact on the story, and I'm not entirely sure if that was intentional or not. Like, I feel like I can see why either way. It's like if you had them in this movie a lot more, it would have made more sense. But at the same time, it's like they're kind of ignored and kind of just left aside. It's like, well, I guess I kind of see why you did that, but I just kind of wish maybe we just knew a little bit more. And the other issue I have with it is that sometimes it does the opposite of show, don't tell. It tells, but doesn't really show. Sometimes it tells things that it shouldn't and shows things that it shouldn't. And it's just kind of an odd mix. But speaking of odd, let's talk about some of the dialogue in this movie. Some of the dialogue in this movie is atrocious, particularly in the first hour of this movie, where, I'm going to be honest, I did not hear a single line of dialogue, at least for the first hour, that I thought was believable. Or it was just said in a weird way. Like, in one of the first few scenes in the movie, don't worry, not a spoiler, but there's a funeral that goes on, and the pastor who's leaving the funeral and such, he's like, Lily, why don't you come up on the stage? I'm like, why would you say it like that? I feel like that's kind of a weird way to put it at a funeral. You could say, and Lily would like to share a few words about her father. And it's like, that would have made a little bit more sense. Like, are you inviting her up for karaoke night? It's like, this is a funeral. Why would you do that? Again, I really wanted to laugh at times during the first hour of this movie, and I didn't because, again, the subject matter, and two, other people were involved in this movie. Other people were seeing this movie with me, and it's like, maybe they're enjoying it a lot more than I am. But I also feel like there's a lot of awkward humor at times. Jenny Slate's character is kind of the comedic foil because, one of these movies does need to have a comedic foil. I'm like, I don't more romance movies rather than just like movies of. But you get what I'm saying. But I found a lot of her humor to be awkward at first. Like the only time I've ever found her convincing was towards the end of the movie, where she has her moment as well. That's the only time I actually liked her character. And you may hear all the stuff I'm saying and say I'm like ripping apart and such, like, oh, this is a chick flick. It's made for women. It's made for people who like read the book and such. But honestly, again, kind of like with kids movies, I don't like excuses for movies that are like not necessarily for me. I've seen better romantic movies and I've seen better action movies, but that has less to do with what my personal taste is and more like just the fact that I prefer well-made movies rather than crap. This movie is definitely better than Borderlands. I'll give it that, but I feel like a lot of people kind of like want to dismiss something like this just because it's a chick flick, and there are other controversies surrounding this movie that I'd rather not dive into. And there are times where I would say this movie does get kind of interesting, but you kind of have to get through a lot before you can actually like start getting invested. I feel like this movie, it's, I don't want to say it's like, this is a really difficult movie to review, mainly because of the subject matter. It's like, it's kind of interesting, but it doesn't go all the way in areas where it should, and goes all the way in areas where it really shouldn't. So even though the last hour of this movie or so is when it gets interesting, the first hour of this movie is honestly kind of laughable at times. The actors do a fine job, the themes are kind of interesting, the twists and turns are kind of interesting throughout, but again, some of that dialogue is pretty terrible. The first hour, a slog to get through. It feels like some of the humor is awkward. It does the opposite of show don't tell at times, and it feels like, again, it shows stuff it shouldn't and tells stuff it shouldn't. So I'll give It Ends With Us 2 out of 4 stars. Stream it. So, what's your favorite romance movie? Kind of a weird question to ask for a movie with this subject matter, but it's being marketed as a romance movie. Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.